This is part 7 in the Craftsman King Seeley 3-wheel bandsaw rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 6, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be starting the reassembly of the bandsaw. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is applying some super lube to the inside bores in the base and in the pedestal top. I do this because it's raw metal and these will rust over time. So applying an oil, a grease, or a paste wax will minimize that rust and protect the bare metal. Once I did this, I went ahead and assembled the pedestal base, and I didn't catch that on camera. Sorry about that. So what I'm doing here is I've got to fabricate a bracket to mount the power panel to the pedestal. I fabricated the bracket off screen, and here it is after I painted it. And then I realized that I had some of this engine turned vinyl, and I decided that would look better. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that vinyl to the bracket. You can get this off of Amazon or any vinyl place online. But it should match up nicely with the engine turned panel that is the blade guard on this bandsaw. So once I got it all cut out and applied, I went ahead and mounted the power panel to the bracket. And then we'll just set that aside for now. Next, we need to assemble the mounting legs on the frame. There's 4 of these mounting legs. I'm just consulting the instructions to make sure I'm putting them on correctly. I left them kind of loose because I want to bolt it to the pedestal first and then I'll tighten them up. So here we are mounting the frame to the pedestal. And this is how we're going to also mount that power panel. So the bolt that's going in that last leg there is going to also hold the bracket for the power panel. Next, I'm installing the Woodruff key on the water pump agricultural bearing, shaft bearing. And then we've got the new tires for all 3 of the wheels. So you need to soak these tires in hot water. And I tried to install them without soaking them, and it's impossible. So soak them in hot water for about 10 minutes. And then I'm just going to use some quick clamps to hold them on the wheel. And then these are Blue Max. You can find them on eBay. And they come with a tool to install them. But it's basically just a piece of wooden dowel with a nail on it. So once I get it as far as I can get it by hand, we're going to go ahead and put that other quick clamp on there. And that's the tool that I was talking about. So you can just wedge that tool between the tire and the wheel And then you can work your way around, stretching that tire. And I'm not going to show you all three of the tires being put on, but I'll show you at least one of them so that you get the idea. It does take a little bit of effort, but once you've got it on there, you can run that tool all the way around to center it better on the wheel. And once it's cooled down and shrinked, it will fit that groove in the wheel perfectly. There won't be any space. And then getting that tool out of there, you just angle it and pull it out. Like so. So once we got that done to all three of them, we needed to install the new needle bearings that I purchased. These are Koyos, so they're very good quality Japanese made needle bearings. And you only need them for the idler wheels. The drive wheel does not have the needle bearings on it. So we'll just line it up with the bore. And you can tap them down in with a brass hammer. You just want to go flush with them. And then flip it over and put the other one in. And there will be a gap between those two bearings. And that gap is for oil to get in between them from that oil port that's on the wheel itself. So we'll do that with both of the idler wheels. And then we've got the rubber plugs for the oil ports. We'll just stick them in for now so we don't lose them. Next, we're going to be assembling the tension and tracking assembly. So that paddle needs to be at the angle that it is, 90 degrees to the drive or the idler shaft that it sits on. And we're just going to start it in. It's a press fit, and it's a pretty hard press fit. So I'm going to use my vise to compress it into that shaft. And then it needs to protrude through the other side about 1/4 of an inch. So I used a couple blocks of wood to give it some standoff. And once we got it where we want it, we can pull it out of there. And then looking at the bracket that it sits in, that paddle needs to be able to rest on that shelf where it's hitting right now. So as long as it's doing that, we're good. So it's going to sit inside that bracket and that's metal to metal, so I'm going to go ahead and put some super lube grease on it. That bracket's aluminum, so that won't rust, but the shaft could rust. And the pin that holds it all together is steel as well, so it could rust. So we're just going to lube it up with some super lube. Put it on both flats that are on that shaft. And then we'll put some super lube inside the bracket itself. Next, we're going to go ahead and drive that pin in that holds the shaft inside the bracket. So it's a 1/4 inch pin and it's splined on one end. So I've rotated the bracket so that the spline section is facing up right now. And all we've got to do is use a punch and drive it in until it's flush. And once we've got that good to go, now that paddle, remember that paddle because that's going to become important when we assemble the rest of this. So next, I'm just applying a little bit of super lube to the hole that's in the back side of that bracket that this square head screw rides in, because that's the tension adjustment screw. And I want it to be able to slide in and out of that hole effortlessly. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and clean up these 3 data panels. We've got the Craftsman logo, the model number, and then the motor data panel. So I like using this Meguiar's cleaner wax. Frank Lee turned me on to this stuff and it's awesome. So all you do is you apply it, spread it across the whole panel, and then let it sit for about 10 minutes and then buff it off by hand. And it does a really nice job of cleaning up these panels. It won't remove any paint, won't damage it in any way. And if it doesn't get clean the first time, you just do it again until you get it to where you want it. And it will pull off most of the grime, rust, that kind of stuff that's on there. And it shines it up nicely. So here I'm just applying it, and then I'm going to set these aside while I work on cleaning up the motor data panel. So the motor one is brass. So of course I'm just going to use some Brasso to clean it up. And it doesn't get as nice and shiny as I'd want it to get, but it's good enough. You'll see once I start buffing it. So that's really all I do with that, is just buff it. And so here I'm just buffing off the cleaner wax off the other two panels. The same method I use to clean up panels on drill presses as well. So next, I could use some pop rivets, but I'm just going to use eyelets, and the holes that are in the panels and in the covers here are 1/8 of an inch, and I need to open them up to 3/16 of an inch because the eyelets that I have are 3/16 of an inch. I couldn't find any 1/8 of an inch ones that look like they'd be anything other than good for paper. So once I've drilled out all those holes in the panels and in the covers, I'm going to go ahead and line the panel up. And I'll drop a rivet into one of the holes, or eyelet into one of the holes. And then you've got a two-part anvil system to fix that eyelet. So I'm going to go ahead and just tape this piece down so it doesn't move around, because we're going to flip this over. And I've got the cover sitting on a towel so that we don't scratch it up or anything when we flip it over. And then we can just use the punch and smack that eyelet down until it mushrooms out and covers or locks in place like it's supposed to. So we'll do that with both of those. And after the second one, that panel is now fixed to the cover. We're going to do the same thing with the other cover for the Craftsman logo. Here it is after the second one is done. And they've got a real nice factory look to them. So here I'm assembling the blade guides. And this is where we'll be using the cool blocks. So both of those small shafts are where the bearing sits, the ball bearing and the rear thrust bearing. So I'm just lubing them with a penetrating lube. I use that super slick stuff. And then these are the cool blocks. So they just insert into the bracket, and then there's a set screw that holds them in place. And these are really small set screws. So originally, these bandsaws came with brass rods that sit in there, but the cool blocks are much better. And we're just lubing up those thrust bearings, dropping them in. And there's a set screw that holds that thrust bearing shaft and the bracket as well. So the top one assembles pretty much the same as the bottom one. Next, we're just going to go ahead and apply some super lube to the bare metal here where the tension and tracking adjustment assembly mounts. And that assembly is going to slide left to right as we're looking at it inside that rectangle area. You'll see how it kind of goes together here. That's one of the plates. There's one on the top and one on the bottom. And that is the assembly, obviously. So we're going to lube up the top and the bottom of this assembly. So when we install this, there's a hole in the back side of the frame that threaded screw needs to go through. And of course, the idler wheel shaft needs to be facing towards the camera. And then we've got an upper and a lower bracket that holds this in place. And it's gapped perfectly to allow that whole assembly to slide left to right as we're looking at it right now. So while I've got my head in the way, once we get it lined up, we can put the 4 screws in there, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. And then we've got the top bracket on here, and see how it moves. So next thing, we'll just go ahead and put that first snap ring on the idler shaft. Next, we will install the lower blade guide. One of the things to keep in mind is that the idler shaft, the one that's attached to the tension and tracking assembly, and the drive shaft that will be at the bottom there, they're at fixed distances from the frame, but the blade guides and the top idler wheel can move at different distances from the frame. We'll have to realign it once we got the blade in there, but for now it's good to go. And then we've got these protrusions that have some bare metal around them, and these are what the trunnions run on. So I'm lubing them up as well, and all of that bare metal that the trunnion's going to slide across. And we've got them on the front and on the back. These are the trunnions that allow the table to tilt. Next, we will install the drive shaft bearing, or bearing drive shaft, or water pump bearing, or whatever you want to call it. Now, the bearing has a groove in the center of it, and there's a set screw. It's a cone point set screw that needs to ride in that groove, and that ensures that the bearing is properly spaced front to rear. So I'm starting the set screw, and then we'll push and pull on that bearing until that set screw ends up in the groove, and then we know we're aligned. We can tighten it down. Now we'll go ahead and install the front trunnion. These two pieces look almost identical, but the rear one has a scale on it. I'll show you that in a second here. So there's the scale. So because they're grabbing onto a part of the frame, you really couldn't install them on the bottom of the table and then put it on here. You have to do it where you're installing the trunnions first and then the table. Next, we've got the leveling screw that goes on the table. And then we've got that screw that closes up the front end of the table where the gap is to allow the blade through. So we're going to go ahead and put that screw in for now so that we don't lose it. And that ensures that the gap, that the table is still flush when that screw is in there. Next, we'll just install the table on the trunnions. And then we're going to level the table. So we can tilt it, adjust that leveling screw. And then check it again. We should be good. And we'll just lock down the trunnion. I'll probably never tilt this table anyways. I don't have a need to do that, but kind of cool that this was a feature on this bandsaw. Kind of wish we had a slot for a miter gauge and a fence, but you know, 1950s. And now I'm just installing the indicator. So for that scale that's on the back side, you've got a little arrow and a screw that holds that arrow in place to tell you that we're at 0 degrees right now. And that's going to kind of wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. In the next video, we will finish assembly and test run the bandsaw, and that will complete the this series of videos. But as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.